Ads in comic books are like the little brother I never had. I love both of our parents, you got advertising, my work and school life, and comic books, one of my favorite hobbies. But when they banged, out popped a little weirdo who on occasion can be really fun and interesting, but the rest of the time is concerning, repetitive, and trying to sell me a giant 10-foot inflatable boa constrictor. So come with me and flip through the family photo album and watch my annoying little brother grow up. Before we get started, let me show you what I'm working with. For those of you that don't know, comics come in a bunch of different formats. We got single issues, trade paperbacks, hardcovers, compacts, graphic novels, compendiums, omnibuses, and digital. But the only one of those that actually has ads in them is single issues. Okay, technically illegal comic websites have ads in them, but it's all just crypto and Gooner pop-ups, so I'm just going to disregard those from the video. But they exist, I suppose. Think of single issues like episodes from a TV show. They come out weekly on Wednesdays, New Comic Book Day, but issues from a single run tend to come out once a month. Most of my collection is DC and Marvel heroes, so there might be a little sample bias in my research, but when looking online I try to diversify just to make it a little more fair. It was tough to track down because definitions are fairly loose and not everyone can agree on one thing, but from what I believe, the first comic ad appeared in Famous Funnies number 7, February 1935. It appears to be an ad for a free bicycle, but it's actually an offer for a job selling magazines that you get in return for a bicycle. These types of ads were fairly popular, but they're not really what you're used to seeing nowadays. The second ad to appear is something that we're more used to seeing. It's just an ad selling a toy gun and helmet based off a character called Buck Rogers. Most of the ads at this time look pretty much like this. They were small, insignificant, nobody cared. Until an event happened that's up there with the war to end all wars and the revolution that changed the world. The insult that made a man out of Mac. This was the first ad in a campaign selling famous bodybuilder Charles Atlas's workout program. These ads in comic strip format follow a beta who's just hanging out when an alpha male comes in and absolutely frame mogs him in front of his girl. So the beta goes back home and starts Atlas maxing until he ascends into Chad. Then the Chad goes back to the alpha male and mogs him so hard that his and other girls start simping. It's a tale as old as time that has been used to this day to sell workout plans and lifestyles. This campaign is what really grew the whole fitness wave in the late 30s of comic book ads. Because by the 40s, comic books were predominantly read by teenage boys who were entering puberty and starting to think about girls they want to impress. These types of ads were really effective for three main reasons. The first being that it was preying on teenage boys' insecurities, the second being that it leaned into the post-war masculinity thing, and the third being that it had the same origin story beats that were in the comics everybody was reading. For the next 40 years, you couldn't pick up a comic book without an ad telling a boy to get jacked. A weirdly high percentage of them featuring some pretty fashionable leopard print underwear. It's a choice for sure. Now before we leave the 1930s completely, there's one more thing I have to talk about. Because the 30s is when we got introduced to one of the most iconic eyesores to ever bless the comic page. The mail order catalog. Dozens of gadgets and gizmos crammed into one page with text so small it'll give you a cluster headache if you glance at it for too long. They're messy, overstimulating, and the exact thing that'll make a kid think, there's gotta be something in here for me. I mean, I get it. I remember how crazy I went for the Scholastic Book Fair catalog, but this is just like another level. Riddle me this. What do a ventriloquist dummy, a live chameleon, and a jujitsu handbook have in common? Is it A, things you shouldn't leave alone with my uncle? B, the 3 keys needed to enter the dungeon I'm standing in? C, 3 pieces of evidence for the crime I was acquitted for? Or D, all of the above? That's right, E! You can get them all from Johnson, Smith & Co. Here's how most of the mail order ads worked. At the bottom of the page, there'd be a rectangle that you'd fill it with your information and whatever you wanted. You'd cut it out, slap it on an envelope, fill it with money, toss it in the mail, and just hope that the product showed up as advertised. As tedious as it sounds in a world with Amazon, this worked. And it worked for a while. The whole mail order thing lasted through the gold, silver, and bronze age of comics, no matter how ridiculous the product got. I mean, look at this. Girls can't resist this kiss me necktie as it glows in the dark. Really? By day, a lovely swank tie. By night, a call to love in glowing words? I mean, who's buying this stuff? But this ad did make me realize something I haven't thought of before. Nowadays, print advertisers have to think about the layout of the ad and what page it's on. But back then, they had to think about if it was worth printing in color. These ads were printed 2 months apart, so the printing technology was the same. But the black and white one was put in Automan number 1, and the colored one was put in Big Shot number 65. My theory is that the advertisers thought it was safer to invest their colored printing money into the established comic run, as opposed to the one that was just getting started, which I thought was interesting. Advertisers had a pretty big revelation in the early 1950s when they asked themselves, what do comic book readers like that we can sell them? Comic books. From that point on, ads from comic book stores and publishers themselves became pretty popular. and they came in all shapes and sizes, from full-page spotlights to just blocks of text. The 50s is also when ads kind of found their place in comic books. There's usually one on the inside of the front cover, one on the last page, one on the inside of the back cover, and one on the outside of the back cover, with an undetermined number of them within the actual comic itself. The reason why I say undetermined is because it all depends. Depends on the publisher, depends on the run, it depends on how many pages there are on the comic itself. Now, people say that there's more ads nowadays, but from what I've seen, it all depends. It bounces all over the place. The only pattern I actually do notice is that Marvel tends to have more ads than DC, but that's not my discovery. That gets beamed on the internet all the time. Up until now, ads in comic books were either small rectangles at the bottom of the page or the full page themselves. It wasn't until the 1950s when publishers started selling half-page ad spaces. So now you could see this funny Slim Jim Werewolf ad and a Razzles Disney World giveaway on the same page. Or this funny Slim Jim Werewolf ad and an Evel Knievel towel ad on the same page. Or this funny Slim Jim Werewolf ad and a DC Comics convention promo on the same page. Or this funny Slim Jim Werewolf ad and a mail order catalog on the same page. Or this hilarious... Ads in the 60s are really starting to focus on employment, the main type being sales job notices for kids. Ignore that 2-person nuclear submarine that shoots torpedoes are selling for $6.98. I already tried. They're not selling them anymore. And I believe it's because of the Cold War and America's fear of falling behind the Soviet Union, but they really started encouraging people to pursue their education. Sure, there's definitely better ways to phrase it than, "Are your children ashamed you never finished high school?" But the sentiment is there, I guess. I was looking at Two Gun Western issue number 10, published October 1950, and with cowboys being a traditional symbol of American masculinity and rugged individualism, I was surprised to see that the ads in this comic book were targeted toward girls. Stereotypical girl things like toy horses, dresses, skincare, and love letters isn't something I was expecting in a stereotypical boy comic from the 1950s and the strict gender rules. I mean, to me it almost seems kind of progressive.
Skinny girls are not glamour girls.
Also, skinny men are not attractive either. Things stayed pretty much the same until the mid-70s when I noticed 3 big changes. The first being that colored photographs are starting to become more popular in higher budget ads. This is for a couple of reasons. 1. Printing methods and paper quality were getting better. 2. Color TVs were starting to become common household items, so colored pictures were becoming the new standard. And 3. Brands were realizing more and more how important advertising was, so they were willing to invest more money into it. The next thing I noticed in the mid-70s is that they started to make their ad formats a little more creative. Sure, they're no Think Small. For those of you at home who don't know, Think Small was a 1959 ad for the Volkswagen Beetle that was groundbreaking because it broke all the rules of print advertising. It was visually subtle, down to earth, and spoke to the reader like they were an intellectual. But most of these comic book ads couldn't afford to be subtle and intellectual because most of the people reading them are children who are notoriously drawn to bright lights and are morons. But the ads did start using less words, dedicating more space to images, and were using more interesting layouts. I even found this toy car ad parodying Think Small, which I was pretty proud of myself for catching. The mid-70s also brought the rise of action figure ads, starting with G.I. Joe, Star Wars, and the $6 Million Man. Eventually it branched off to like every single franchise, but that's down the road, I'll get back to it later. Like you saw with the insult I made a man out of Mac, some advertisers like to make their ads in comic strip format, just to kind of fit the medium and make it more interesting for kids to read. Advertisers have been doing this since the mid-40s, but I noticed an uptick in the 70s, especially with celebrity endorsements, such as athletes like Rick Barry and Dr. J selling Spalding basketballs, or more interestingly, fictional characters selling products. Having Superman sell fruit pies or Bugs Bunny selling cupcakes is like having a spokesperson with a written and emotional attachment, and you don't really have to worry about them getting into a scandal. To kids, the logic was simple. If it's good enough for Bugs Bunny, it's good enough for me. They even did full sponsored single issue ads, like this one I found released in 1980. Superman, the computer that saved Metropolis, which is a Superman Radio Shack collaboration where a bunch of students help Superman save Metropolis with the Tandy Radio Shack 80, which was one of the first mass-marketed home computers. They even had ads for the TRS-80 in the comic, which I think is a bit of a hat on a hat, but whatever. But don't worry, despite all these changes, there's still the old reliably unreliable mail order catalog, promising things like US coin-filled barrel, X-ray specs that see through skin and clothes, but be taller? Who's buying this stuff? Alright, it's September 1977 and one of the most revolutionary gaming consoles in history just came out. It popularized microprocessor-based hardwares and games stored on swappable ROM cartridges. The Atari 2600. This was huge. The Atari and comic books had the exact same demographic, so video game ads took over comic books. You couldn't turn a page without seeing an ad for a Daisy air rifle or or model spaceships. Okay, it took 5 years, but finally in 1982, video game ads took over. I tried to figure out why there was a delay, and as far as I can tell, the Atari 2600 and kind of home video game consoles in general were just a little too niche, and it took a couple years for them to become common household items. Also, it took for everyone's favorite arcade games like Pac-Man and Space Invaders to come out in the Atari for people to actually think it was worth buying. But once people started buying them, it became more popular, which means more games were made, which means there was more things to sell. The 80s was a big turning point for comic book ads. A lot of things were changing, like the fitness phase was dying down. Sure, you'd see the full page every now and again, but most of the fitness ads were squeezed into the small sections of mail order catalogs. That's because by the early 80s, comic book ads were pretty much just for video games, comics, and junk food, which I mean, hell yeah, those things are all cool, but you know what's not cool? Smoking. That's right, the 80s marked the beginning of the war on cigarettes in comic books as concerns of youth smoking grew. One of the most popular PSAs was Nicotine, a supervillain created by the Health Organization Council and ad agency Saatchi & Saatchi in collaboration with DC Comics, whose evil plans of hooking kids on cigarettes were constantly foiled by Superman. He appeared in multiple full-page ads, but had 2 of his own single issues that had a whole arc and went into greater detail about the effects of smoking. Ads for comic books themselves are looking different too. They were full pages of beautiful artwork promoting runs or singles from the publishers themselves instead of external sellers like comic book stores. Those joined the workout programs over in the mail order catalogs. Speaking of cool artwork, pretty much every photo was printed in color by now, and the 80s had this futuristic space vibe to it, so all the art was really fun and vibrant. They had glowing effects, neon colors, and robots. Ads stopped looking less like mail order catalogs and more like movie posters. Rather than cramming pages with text, which there still was a lot of, advertisers increasingly relied on dramatic imagery and bold headlines to grab attention. Comics weren't just competing with other comics anymore. They were competing with television, movies, arcades, any other form of entertainment that was fighting for kids' attention. Now we're getting into my personal favorite decades, the 90s and 2000s. You guys have no idea how much fun I had doing research for this project. Shout out to comic book ads on TikTok, because with my collection on top of theirs, I had a blast for hours. Definitely hours. The 80s and 90s were very similar. They were both loud, colorful, and sold similar products, but there were a bunch of changes, the most apparent being the vibe. Where the 80s was future, space, technology, the 90s was MTV, Skater Boy, Fighter Jet. Very like cool older brother core. But you know what's not cool? Smoking. Here's Jim Gordon with heart disease. 2-page ad spreads also really blew up in the 90s for 2 main reasons. The first being, like I said before, everyone's fighting for attention in a world where everything's bright and flashing. So, what's more attention grabbing than 1 full page? 2 full pages. The second reason is that comic books are starting to become collector's items, so lots of money was put toward higher quality printing and paper, so 2-page ad spreads could actually look good. If they tried this in the 70s, the colors would have been smudged and the crease would have been off center. It would have been a mess. And it wasn't just comic books people were collecting. Action figures were huge. From WWF to TMNT to XMEN, everybody was getting their oh! Is that a website URL in that ad? You know what this means. Now all ads have to do is just get people's attention, and if people are interested, they can check out the website. Ads are going to be so much less cluttered now. This internet thing is going to be great for print advertising. Alright, I want to show you guys some of my personal favorites from this decade that I found, so please enjoy this montage with some royalty-free 90s music. Happy Y2K! Alright, before I get into all the changes, I want to say something. Today we remember the mail order catalog. A glorious mess of random scams, plastic garbage, and body shaming. For decades, the mail order catalog gave children just one more reason to pester their parents for money. And what is childhood if not the privilege to spend your parents' hard-earned cash on 40 red China stamps? Enough to make a grown man cry. Though it may be gone, its spirit lives on in every dropship item on Temu. Rest in peace, you hideous monument to post-war consumerism. I'm fine. So, it's a new millennium. What's going on? There's this incredibly popular PSA called Tobacco is Wacko if you're a teen, featuring that wacky slogan on some wacky artwork, which I actually really like. But this campaign is sponsored by Lorillard Tobacco Company, America's oldest continuously operating tobacco company, who are basically supervillains and now sell fruit-flavored vapes with bold words and bright colors. So, thanks for the campaign, you guys. But you know what's even worse than tobacco? Marijuana. That's right, the 2000s came with a big rise in anti-weed PSAs as sentiments from Nixon and Reagan's war on drugs clashed with the rising popularity and social acceptance of weed. So you're probably thinking, I can't smoke cigs, I can't smoke weed. What can I do? Drink milk. The California Milk Processor Board was on a roll in the 2000s. They were funny, culturally relevant, and they had you checking everybody's upper lip for a milk mustache, baby. One of the best campaigns to ever do it. Cheers. I also want to give some credit to the gum brands for playing with the medium, like making a fake half-page ad and breaking the fourth wall, or getting the bottom half of 2 pages, which I haven't seen done before, which is very cool. There were 2 other products that were really prominent in the 2000s. That was action figures, which were just riding the collector wave from the 90s, and video games that sound like they were made up to play in the background of movies. Games like Amazing Island, Gauntlet 7 Sorrows, Alien Syndrome, and Gladiator's Sword of Vengeance. Sorry if I just named anybody's favorite game, I don't mean to yuck your yum. Those games just sound super fake. There were also a lot of military ads in the 2000s, mainly Army and Navy, but it's clear that they had different target audiences, with lines like, "Paying for college has never been this much fun," or "Because bomb-sniffing dogs don't work well underwater. It's obvious the Navy's looking for goofy guys to recruit." But I don't know who the Army's looking for. Take a look at this timeline. He didn't want to be a follower, so he became a soldier? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that like the main thing? Isn't that what they do over there? They follow orders? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Alright, here's the same thing as last time, but with 2000s ads and 2000s royalty-free music. As we head into the 2010s, you can really start to see the decline of print advertising. Who'd have thunk the internet was going to be that big of a deal? Trying to find the big out-of-house players in this decade was pretty easy because there wasn't a lot of competition. Third place goes to Above the Influence, who is still pumping out anti-drug PSAs when most people kind of just stopped caring. Second place goes to 5Gum, whose print ads weren't as popular as their
stimulate your senses
commercials, but they were still doing pretty good work on paper. And first place goes to the Got Milk guys. Other than those 3, most of the out-of-house ads were just for random video games and TV shows. The rest of the ads are DC selling DC and Marvel selling Marvel, which may sound kind of boring, but it's a testament to how large the comic book industry has grown. The MCU's in full swing and comics aren't just for nerds anymore. So with the expansion of products and audience, they're self-sufficient in their own ecosystem, which is kind of the dream for a giant corporation. And finally, we've made it to present day. The 2020s have pretty much just been a continuation of the 2010s, but with more self-promotion. It's weird. Ads have started feeling less like ads and more like announcements. We're coming out with a new comic series, a new movie, a new toy, a new game. We're in Fortnite. It is still very much advertising, it's just less fun, I guess. Most of the ads are cover art with a release date underneath, which isn't as creative in my opinion. But hey, multiple professional marketing teams have been doing this for a decade, so if that's what works, that's what works. Good on them. So after 91 years of growing up, how did my little brother change? He went from selling x-ray glasses to video games to superhero movies. The printing got sharper, the photography got better, and the layouts got cleaner. But at their core, comic book ads were always doing the same thing. Just trying to sell whatever to readers. Sometimes it was a toy, sometimes it was a lifestyle, sometimes it was a workout course with leopard print underwear. But after all this research, I still find myself asking, who's buying this stuff?